Jagadev, so you have beautifully described how these practices and rituals influence individual growth. But in a larger societal context, how can these practices be used to engage the wider Malayalam speaking community in the mission of cultural and literary preservation? That's a great question. The key to engaging the broader community lies in making these practices accessible and relevant to the lives of everyday people, especially in the younger generation. Let me break it down. For community based learning and workshops, one way to engage a larger Malayalam speaking community is by organizing community based workshops that combine spiritual practices with their cultural learning. These workshops could focus on how meditation, Sudarshan Kriya, or Ayurveda can enhance one's relationship with the Malayalam language and literature. For example, workshops on Malayalam poetry and Sanskrit shlokas. In these workshops, participants can engage in the chanting of shlokas or devotional Malayalam poetry while learning about the linguistic and cultural richness behind the words. Meditation and Sudarshan Kriya can be incorporated to prepare the mind for deep listening and understanding. For Ayurvedic cooking and literary discussions, imagine a workshop where people can learn how to prepare traditional Ayurvedic meals while discussing Malayalam literature, works that reference food and health. This would make the preservation of Malayalam culture tangible and accessible to a broader audience. Introducing art of living practices and cultural preservation into school and university curriculum is another crucial step. Young people are the torch bearers of culture, and if we can instill in them the value of their own language, literature, and spirituality, we are ensuring the continuity of that culture. Initiatives could include cultural festivals and poetry competitions. Schools can host cultural festivals that celebrate Malayalam language and literature through poetry recitations, drama, and classical musical performances. The inclusion of satsangs or meditation satsangs sessions during these festivals could encourage the students to understand the deeper spiritual and intellectual roots of their culture. Residential camps for students, which combine the study of classical Malayalam texts with art of living practices, could create an immersive experience that binds together intellectual and spiritual growth. For media and technology in the digital age, reaching out to a wider audience through media is essential. Documentaries, podcasts, and social media campaigns that highlight the richness of Malayalam literature, coupled with teachings from His Holiness Gurudev Shri Ravi Shankarji, can help spread the message globally. Sharing wisdom through digital platforms ensures that even those outside of Kerala can appreciate and contribute to the preservation of the language and culture. This has been an incredibly rich and insightful conversation. As a final thought, what is your vision for the future of Malayalam literature and culture in the context of global challenges? My vision for the future is that Malayalam will not only continue to thrive, but will become a beacon of spiritual and intellectual enlightenment in a rapidly changing world. While we face global challenges like cultural homogenization and the loss of traditions, I believe that the integration of spiritual practices and a deep reverence for our roots can lead to the rejuvenation of Malayalam by practicing the teachings of His Holiness Gurudev Shri Ravi Shankarji and integrating Vedic rituals, meditation, and Ayurveda into our daily lives. We create a vibrant, resilient culture that not only preserves our language and literature but also elevates it to a higher plane. Our culture is a treasure chest of wisdom, and if we can continue to nurture it, the younger generation will find ways to adapt and express it in the modern world. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I feel deeply inspired and hopeful about the future of Malayalam culture and literature, knowing that practices like these have the potential to sustain and elevate them for generations to come. Yes, thank you. It's been a privilege to discuss this with you. May the light of wisdom continue to guide the Malayalam language, its literature, and all who are dedicated to its preservation. Namaste and Jai Gurudev. Jaydev, you have beautifully described how meditation, Sudarshan Kriya, and Vedic practices can support individuals on a personal level. But what role do you see for community centered initiatives in advancing the collective preservation of Malayalam culture and literature? That's a very important question. The preservation of any culture is not just about individual efforts, but also about creating a community that is conscious of and actively engaged in safeguarding its heritage. Community centered initiatives play a crucial role in bringing people together, fostering shared experiences, and ensuring that knowledge is passed on. For cultural gatherings and literary festivals, organizing local and regional literary festivals or cultural gatherings is an effective way to bring together writers, poets, scholars, and practitioners from different walks of life. These events could be a platform for reading sessions of classical Malayalam literature, including works from famous poets like Vallathol, Narayan Menon, or Ulur S. Parmeshwara Iyer. Workshops on writing and preserving oral traditions, which are often rich in folklore and wisdom, and satsang style gatherings where people can listen to the wisdom of revered scholars, poets, and spiritual leaders who share their reflections on the role of Malayalam in preserving culture. Such events create an environment where everyone from students to elders can participate in discussions and express their creativity. In turn, they help raise awareness about the importance of preserving not just the language but also the philosophical and artistic traditions associated with it. For the collaboration between temples and cultural organizations, temples have historically been centers of Malayalam culture from where the language, literature, and spiritual practices have been preserved and propagated. Partnering with temples and other cultural organizations can help bring a collective focus to preserving and promoting our literary traditions. Events like Bhagavad Saptaha, week-long sacred recitations, or devotional satsangs can be organized that highlight classical Malayalam poetry or spiritual texts. Through these community engagements, people will not only practice meditation, chanting, and other art of living techniques, but also delve into the intellectual and spiritual wisdom preserved in Malayalam texts, gaining a sense of collective responsibility for their cultural heritage. Many young people today are disconnected from their roots due to the globalization and digitalization of culture. Integrating art of living teachings with Malayalam language and literature into the school curriculum can bridge this gap. Students can participate in poetry recitation competitions where they can recite works of classic Malayalam poets, workshops on the philosophical significance of Malayalam literary texts, and spiritual learning sessions that highlight how language and literature are deeply connected to personal growth, peace, and cultural wisdom. Such programs could be integrated into schools as a daily practice, encouraging the younger generation to not just learn the language but also to connect with it on a deeper level. It's exciting to think about the potential of community centered initiatives in preserving Malayalam. Could you also share your thoughts on the role of digital platforms, especially social media, in disseminating the knowledge of Malayalam literature, language, and art of living practices to a wider global audience? Yes, the role of digital platforms and social media is indispensable in today's world, especially for cultural preservation. The reach of digital tools far exceeds traditional boundaries, and they provide an opportunity to bring the wisdom of Malayalam literature and art film practices to a global audience. We can have digital archives and content creation. One of the most powerful ways to preserve Malayalam literature and culture is by creating digital archives. This could include ebooks and audiobooks of classical Malayalam literature, ensuring that ancient texts are accessible to everyone anywhere. This could be in the form of recorded recitations, stories, and explanations by scholars or even art of living certified teachers. Online repositories of Malayalam manuscripts that are currently scattered across libraries and personal collections. These can be digitized and made accessible for research and public learning. Video and audio content where prominent Malayalam scholars discuss ancient texts, unravel their meaning, and share their interpretations. This could be shared widely on platforms like YouTube, Instagram, or podcast channels. Such digital content allows people across the globe to engage with Malayalam literature in a way that was not possible before. Social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter are powerful tools for connecting with the younger generations. We could initiate campaigns that feature daily quotes from classical Malayalam literature or from the teachings of His Holiness Gurudev Shri Shri Ravi Shankarji. These can be paired with meditation tips or reflections to show how the spiritual wisdom in these texts can be applied to everyday life. Create online challenges where people share their experiences of practicing Sudarshan Kriya, chanting shlokas, or reciting Malayalam poetry. Promoting Malayalam art forms such as Kathakali or Mohiniyattam through short videos, behind the scenes content, and interactive storytelling. By using these tools, we can cultivate a sense of pride in Malayalam culture and language, reaching a younger, more diverse audience that might not have otherwise been engaged. Given the widespread availability of the internet, online learning has become one of the most effective methods for spreading knowledge. Creating online courses that combine the practice of art of living techniques like Sudarshan Kriya, meditation, and pranayama with lessons in Malayalam language, literature, and culture, virtual storytelling sessions that bring to life classical Malayalam literary works with expert commentary to help interpret their meaning, and interactive webinars on specific topics in Malayalam philosophy, poetry, or even Ayurveda where people can join and ask questions, thus creating an interactive learning experience. These courses could be offered as a part of platforms like Coursera, Udemy, or even an Artific's own digital platforms. They would provide an immersive experience that connects spiritual practice with the intellectual and artistic aspects of Malayalam culture. Jagadev. Jagadev, for global Malayalam diaspora, the global Malayalam speaking diaspora presents a unique opportunity to preserve and promote a language. Digital platforms allow for a connection between people from Kerala who are living around the world, creating virtual communities that practice art of living techniques and discuss Malayalam literature can help bridge the gap between generations and geographies. For instance, online discussion forums where people can debate interpretations of ancient Malayalam texts and how those texts relate to modern life, digital book clubs that focus on Malayalam novels, poetry, and plays, global satsangs where people from different countries can come together virtually to meditate, chant, and discuss the intersection of spirituality and language. By leveraging these platforms, we can ensure that the Malayalam language remains vibrant and relevant to those who are geographically distant but culturally connected. These ideas are truly inspiring. Now, on a more personal note, how has your involvement in art of living, and Vedic themselves influenced your own relationship with Malayalam language, culture, and literature? And what insights have you gained? That's a very reflective question. My personal journey with the art of living and Vedic themselves has profoundly shaped my understanding of the connection between spirituality, language, and culture. It has not only deepened my connection to Malayalam, but also helped me recognize the immense potential this language holds for spiritual and intellectual growth. A deeper connection to Malayalam's spiritual essence. In my early years, I saw Malayalam purely as a means of communication, a language of literature and poetry. However, through the teachings of His Holiness Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankarji and the practices of art of living, I began to understand Malayalam on a much deeper level. Malayalam is not just a tool for communication, it's a sacred instrument that connects us to the divine, to our roots, and to our culture. The sound patterns, the rhythms, the rhythmic flow, and the deep philosophical meaning embedded in Malayalam text are all intricately tied to our spiritual practices, to practices like mantra chanting and prayer. I have come to appreciate how language itself is a form of spiritual expression. The very act of speaking Malayalam, whether through devotional verses or poetry, is a way of connecting with higher consciousness. This insight has transformed my relationship with the language. What I have learned through art of living is that spirituality is not separate from daily life. It permeates every action, every word, and every thought. Malayalam literature, particularly devotional poetry, reflects this deeply. The great Malayalam poets like Ezutuchan, Vallathol, and Punathanam did not just write poetry, they were engaged in a deeply spiritual practice through their words. By integrating the practices of Sudarshan Kriya and meditation, I have been able to tap into the deeper meanings behind these literary works, understanding their spiritual underpinnings in ways I had not before. The poetry now feels alive, vibrating with the same energy as the practices I do each day. Finally, I have gained a deeper sense of responsibility to pass this wisdom down. It is not enough to simply appreciate the beauty of Malayalam literature and culture. I believe it is our duty to ensure that it continues to thrive as a teacher and practitioner. I now see it as a part of my mission to make others aware of how intertwined spirituality and language are, and how practices like meditation, Ayurveda, and Vedic rituals can help us preserve and elevate our cultural heritage. That's a beautiful perspective, and your insights give us hope for the future of Malayalam culture. As we conclude, what message would you like to share with our readers, particularly those who are passionate about preserving Malayalam language and literature? I would like to say this: preserving a language is not just about keeping its words alive, it's about keeping its spirit alive. Malayalam, like all languages, carries the wisdom and soul of its people. The practices of art of living, the teachings of His Holiness Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankarji, and the rituals of Vedic Dhamma Sansthan provide us with the tools to not only preserve but also elevate the culture embedded in the Malayalam language. For anyone passionate about preserving Malayalam, I encourage you to engage with on all levels, intellectually, spiritually, and, and emotionally. Start by meditating with the language, chanting its beautiful mantras, and reading its literature with an open heart and sharing its wisdom with others. Remember, the preservation of any culture begins within. When we live the values and wisdom of our ancestors, we create a living, breathing culture that will continue to inspire generations to come. Thank you so much for sharing your profound wisdom. It's been a truly enlightening conversation, and I'm sure our readers will feel inspired to connect with their roots and contribute to the preservation of Malayalam culture in meaningful ways. It's been my pleasure. May we all work together to keep the flame of Malayalam culture alive, bright and vibrant. Namaste and Jai Gurudev. You have touched on the relationship between spirituality and language. Can you expand on how the practice of mantra chanting and the recitation of Malayalam shlokas can enhance one's understanding of both the language and the spiritual wisdom embedded in it. Yes, mantra chanting and the recitation of Malayalam shlokas are not just linguistic exercises, they are deeply spiritual practices that elevate both the practitioner and the language. Let me explain in more detail how these practices work on multiple levels. For vibration and sound energy, mantras by their very nature carry specific vibrations that have the potential to transform the mind and spirit. Malayalam, with its rich phonetic structure, is especially suited for mantra chanting because it allows for the resonation of sounds in a profound way. Each syllable in Malayalam mantra or shloka has its own vibrational frequency that affects the body, mind, and spirit. When we chant these mantras, whether in praise of deities or in a meditative prayer, we are connecting with the deeper layers of consciousness. These vibrations also intersect with the atmosphere, creating an environment that is conducive to learning, healing, and growth. The rhythmic flow of Malayalam shlokas, in particular, opens up the mind to deeper states of awareness, which enhances comprehension of their meanings and relevance. The recitation of Malayalam shlokas, especially in the form of prayer or devotional singing, demands full attention and focus. As we chant, we engage both the intellect and the heart. We not only have to focus on the meaning of the words, but also on the pronunciation, tone, and rhythm. This level of focus and attention is a form of mindfulness that enhances our cognitive abilities. With regular practice, one becomes more aware of the subtle meanings embedded in the language. In Malayalam, the meaning of words can often go beyond a literal translation. Through mantra chanting and reciting shlokas, one begins to experience the language at a deeper experiential level. A key aspect of Malayalam literature, especially in devotional and philosophical works, is the emotional depth behind the words. When we chant or recite these works with devotion, we connect emotionally with the content. This emotional connection amplifies the impact of the words, allowing us to understand not just the intellectual meaning, but also the heart and the soul behind the language. For example, when we recite devotional Malayalam poetry or bhakti hymns, we experience the emotion of love, devotion, and surrender. These emotional experiences can open the heart and make the meaning of the text more accessible. By chanting mantras and reciting shlokas regularly, we are also preserving the pronunciation, intonation, and traditional rhythm of Malayalam. Language is not just about words, it's about how those words are spoken and experienced. By maintaining the traditional forms of pronunciation and rhythm, we ensure that the language remains vibrant and true to its words and roots. Chanting involves both mental and physical engagement. The sound production activates the vocal cords, while the mental focus activates neural pathways that improve concentration, memory, and cognitive clarity. In the context of Malayalam, these practices help preserve the intricate sounds and patterns that are unique to the language, making it more engaging and easier to retain in the long term. So, by chanting mantras and reciting shlokas are not just ways to honor a spiritual tradition, but are in essence ways of preserving and deepening our connection to the language itself. Given the deep interconnection between language and spirituality in Malayalam culture, how can we use traditional practices like Sandhya Vandanam or daily prayer, ritual prayers, and Upanayana or sacred rite ceremony to ensure the continuity of the language and its cultural practices, especially among the younger generation? That's an excellent question. Both Sandhya Vandanam and Upanayana are highly significant Vedic practices that not only carry spiritual value but also act as vehicles for cultural transmission. These rituals are part of the foundation of spiritual and cultural learning in our society. For Sandhya Vandanam, it's a daily practice of connection. Sandhya Vandanam is a series of rituals and prayers that are performed at dawn, noon, and dusk. The practice involves the recitation of mantras, including the Gayatri Mantra, and helps the practitioner tune their body and mind to the rhythms of the natural world. For daily recitations of Sanskrit and Malayalam mantras, the mantras recited during Sandhya Vandanam, especially the Gayatri Mantra, and others that are often in Sanskrit or Malayalam, keep the language alive in the daily consciousness of the practitioner. The Gayatri Mantra, often recited in the traditional Malayalam accent, ensures that the linguistic structure of the language is practiced on a daily basis. For example, the Guru Gayatri in Malayalam, which many devotees recite during Sandhya Vandanam, contains deep layers of meaning. By chanting these sacred verses daily, children and adults alike reinforce the importance of sound, rhythm, and pronunciation in the language. When these mantras are imbibed into one's routine, it creates a living, breathing relationship with the language, transmitting values of discipline and devotion. The ritual nature of Sandhya Vandanam helps instill values like discipline, regularity, and devotion. These are core values in the preservation of any culture, and as children grow up in home where Sandhya Vandanam is practiced, they develop a sense of respect for the rituals, language, and traditions associated with it. Over time, this leads to the continuation of these practices in future generations. Upanayam is a rite passage that marks a child's formal entry into the study of sacred knowledge, including the Vedas, mantras, and cultural traditions. It's deeply connected to the language of instruction, typically Sanskrit or Malayalam, depending on the region. This sacred ceremony often marks the beginning of one's serious education in spiritual and intellectual pursuits. During Upanayam, the child traditionally receives the first sacred lessons, including the recitation of important Vedic verses, including the Gayatri Mantra. In the case of Malayalam speaking families, the child may also be taught Malayalam prayers, devotional poetry, and cultural history. This helps ensure that the language is not just spoken but also studied, revered, and passed on to the next generation. In addition to being a spiritual initiation, Upanayam helps instill a strong sense of cultural identity. The child is formally introduced to their role as a member of the community who carries the responsibility of preserving and perpetuating cultural wisdom. The sacred thread itself, known as Janu or Punal in Malayalam, is symbolic of the connection between the individual and the broader tradition of knowledge that they are now a part of. In Malayalam speaking families, the connection between language and identity is paramount. The Upanayam ceremony often involves elders and gurus teaching the child to recite prayers and verses in Malayalam. This practice anchors the child's understanding of the language as an essential part of their personal and spiritual growth. By learning these prayers and mantras, they begin to understand that Malayalam is not just a mode of communication, but a means of connecting to divine wisdom and cultural heritage. Both Sandhya Vandanam and Upanayam go beyond mere rituals. They are spiritual practices that blind individuals to a higher purpose and foster intellectual and linguistic growth. These practices ensure that Malayalam, with its rich spiritual and philosophical heritage, continues to be a vehicle for personal and communal growth. If these rituals are continued with authenticity, especially in modern day settings, they can help young people maintain a link with their cultural past while adapting to the present world. The daily engagement with language, prayer, and spirituality through these practices ensures that the essence of Malayalam, both as a language and as a vehicle for cultural and spiritual wisdom, continues to live on. It's evident that these traditional practices play a vital role in sustaining the language and culture. How do you think art of living can help make these practices more accessible to the younger generation, especially those living outside of Kerala or in urban areas? That's a great question. In today's fast paced, urbanized world, many young people, especially those living outside Kerala or in non traditional environments, might feel disconnected from these practices. However, Art of Living provides a powerful platform to make these traditional practices not only accessible but also relevant to the younger generation. One of the primary goals of Art of Living is to make spiritual practices accessible, practical, and easy to integrate into daily life. In the case of traditional practices like Sandhya Vandanam or Upanayam or Art of Living, create short guided sessions for Sandhya Vandanam that can be practiced anywhere, anytime to make Malayalam language and Art of Living Sudarshan Kriya meditation more popular. Check it out.